The auction house smelled like money and cruelty, which, in Mara Voss's experience, were usually the same thing. She stood in the back of the hall because standing in the back was what you did when you didn't want anyone to see your face, and watched the Velthara auctioneers move through their catalog with the brisk efficiency of beings who had been selling things for 600 years. The hall itself was a converted cargo bay aboard the conclave station Yashari 9, a neutral platform the size of a small moon that orbited nothing in particular and answered to no one in particular, which made it ideal for commerce that other stations would politely decline to host. The ceiling was too high. The lighting was the blue-white of a sun that had never known Earth. Everything hummed faintly. The way things hummed when the machinery holding them together was older than most civilizations. Mara had a coffee thermos. It was from a gas station in Flagstaff, Arizona, and it was the most important thing she owned. She unscrewed the cap and drank, while Lot 47 was walked out. They came in a single-file line, shackled at the wrists with bioluminescent restraints that pulsed every few seconds, a status indicator, she'd been told, showing that the merchandise was compliant and chemically suppressed. There were 11 of them. She counted twice. 11 in a species that traveled in multiples of 7, which already told you something had gone wrong somewhere upstream. They were Kethavari, a name she'd only seen in briefing documents until 6 months ago, when she'd started doing this job. Bipedal, gray-skinned, with elongated skulls that swept backward like the prow of a ship, and 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern that let them see in 360 degrees. The 2 forward eyes were open. The 2 lateral ones were sealed shut with what looked like scar tissue. The auctioneer, a Velthara named something she couldn't pronounce, gestured at the line with a limb that functioned as both arm and pointer. Lot 47, it announced, in the trade pigeon that everyone used aboard Yashari 9. 11 Kethavari workers, graded defective by the Harvesting Consortium. Classification: non-responsive to standard behavioral conditioning. Cannot be relied upon for precision labor, ceremonial function, or registered warfare contracts. Offered at clearance pricing. Reserve: 12 units of exchange per individual, bulk discount applicable. Defective. Myra took another drink of coffee. The Kethavari in the front of the line, the one she was watching most carefully, had his 2 forward eyes open and fixed on a point somewhere past the far wall of the auction hall, on something no one else could see. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He wasn't looking at the auctioneer. He was looking at nothing, with the focused attention of someone who had decided that the present moment was not a place worth inhabiting. She recognized that look. She'd worn it herself, in a different life, in a room with fluorescent lights and a 2-way mirror, while people on the other side of the glass decided what to do with her. She raised her hand. The Velthara handler who processed her purchase seemed personally offended. "You understand," it said in its precise, clicking way, "that defective merchandise carries no warranty. The consortium's classification is final. These units have demonstrated persistent noncompliance across multiple recalibration cycles. They are not functional workers." "I understand," Mara said. "You will receive no compensation if they prove unmanageable." "I understand that too. You are purchasing 11 beings who cannot perform the tasks they were bred to perform, at a price that, while discounted, is not insignificant, for reasons that are my own," she said. She slid the exchange chip across the counter. "Process the transfer." The handler processed the transfer. It made a sound she suspected was the Veltharan equivalent of a shrug, and then it handed her a stack of 11 release documents and a remote for the restraint system. She walked back into the holding area alone. They were in a single cell, which was just a steel-floored room with a drain in the center and a bench along one wall. 10 of them sat on the bench. The 11th, the one with the focused, faraway look, stood at the back wall with his forehead pressed lightly against the metal, as if listening for something on the other side. Mara stopped in the doorway. She held up the remote where they could all see it. Then she pressed the release, and the bioluminescent restraints went dark and fell away. Nobody moved. She'd expected that. She crouched down slowly, making herself small, and set the remote on the floor, then pushed it across toward them with one finger. "My name is Mara Voss," she said in Kethavari. It was halting, her pronunciation clumsy in the lateral consonants, but it was Kethavari. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to use you. I have a ship. It's not a good ship, but it moves. I can take you wherever you want to go, or somewhere new if you don't have a place. That's the whole offer. You can say no." Silence. The one at the back wall lifted his head away from the metal. Slowly, he turned. His 4 eyes found her, all 4, the sealed ones somehow tracking her even through the scar tissue, and he studied her with the complete, unnerving attention of a species built to perceive things from every angle at once. "You speak our language badly," he said. "I know. Why do you speak it at all?" "Because it seemed rude not to try." Another long silence. Then something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, because his face wasn't built for what she'd call a smile, but a slight reorganization of features that suggested a downgrade in threat assessment. "I am called Sarath," he said, "in the old naming form which the consortium did not use. Where is your ship?" The ship was called the Persistence of Error Asterisk, which Mara had named herself, because she'd bought it from a salvage dealer on a station near the Meridian Arm, and the hull had already had the word persistence stenciled on it in 3 languages, and she decided to run with the theme. It was a modified long-range hauler, 40 meters bow to stern, with a crew compartment that had been designed for 6 and currently housed, as of this evening, herself and 11 beings who were trying to figure out what she was. She let them have the run of the ship while she flew. Through the cockpit's rear window, she'd had it installed herself because she hated not knowing what was happening behind her. She watched them move through the corridors, open doors, examine equipment with their 4-eyed gaze. They were methodical, careful. They touched nothing without looking at it first. The one called Sarath spent 20 minutes standing in front of the engine room's monitoring panel, not touching anything, just reading the readouts. She'd done the math in her head, back in the auction hall. 11 Kethavari classified defective due to noncompliance with behavioral conditioning. In her experience, limited but pointed, when a sophisticated alien species labeled something defective, what they usually meant was that it had failed to do what they wanted, which was not the same as being broken. The coffee was cold by the time Sarath came forward and stood in the co-pilot's chair without sitting in it. "You're CIA," he said. She'd been expecting it, and it still landed wrong. "Former." "There is no former in your organization. There is when you buy 11 aliens at a clearance auction using your own money, without filing a report." He was quiet for a moment. The stars moved past the forward viewport at the slow, measured pace of a ship that wasn't trying to be anywhere in particular. "Why did you do it?" he asked. "Do what?" "Buy us, the real reason, not the reason you told the handler." Myra looked at the stars. She'd learned a long time ago that when someone asked you for the real reason, giving them the cover story was an insult to everyone involved. "When I was 26, she said, I was recruited for a program. I was told it was a special unit. Best of the best, they said. The exact words. We were trained, briefed, deployed. We did good work. Then we started asking questions about the work, and it turned out the questions were more inconvenient than we'd anticipated, and the program had a procedure for inconvenient assets. They tried to recondition you." "Multiple cycles," she said. "I'm apparently non-responsive." The silence after that was different from the earlier silences. She felt him reassess her, not with suspicion, but with the careful attention of someone recalculating a sum. The consortium classified us as defective, Sarath said slowly, because we refused to assist in an operation against a populated world. The recalibration was meant to remove the refusal. It did not work. What world? Yours, he said, or one very like it. A world that had not yet been mapped into the Conclave's resource ledger but had been identified as suitable for extraction. He paused. We were to be the advanced team, surveyors. The consortium's doctrine requires that workers who operate on pre-contact worlds be behaviorally conditioned to perceive the inhabitants as non-sapient. It makes the work cleaner. The stars kept moving. They tried to make you see us as things, Mara said. Yes. And you wouldn't do it. We could not, he said. Not because the conditioning failed, because we had already been to your world, 4 of us briefly before the classification. We had seen your people, spoken to one, an old woman in a field with a walking stick who stopped to share her food with us without asking what we were. He paused again. The consortium's conditioning asks you to believe a thing you know is not true. For some of us, that was not possible. Mara thought about the old woman in the field. She thought about the particular kind of stubbornness it took to hold onto what you knew when someone with a great deal of authority and a great deal of machinery was dedicated to making you forget it. She thought about a fluorescent-lit room and the feeling of your own mind refusing to bend. Sarath, she said. Yes. The consortium's advance operation. When is it scheduled? A pause that was longer than the others. You already knew, he said. That is why you were at the auction. I knew about the operation. I didn't know there were survivors from the advance team. I thought they'd been destroyed. She looked at the monitoring board at nothing in particular. I need to know when. 93 days, he said, from this moment. The briefing happened in the cargo hold because it was the largest space on the ship, and Mara had learned that when you needed to tell people a very large, very bad thing, you gave them room to react. She stood at the front. The 11 of them arranged themselves in a loose semicircle, not sitting, none of them, standing with the focused calm of beings who had been through enough that bad news was just another piece of information to process. She told them everything she knew. The Velthara Consortium, not the Velthara as a species, she was careful to clarify, the consortium specifically, a commercial extraction entity that operated under Conclave Charter but answered mostly to its own shareholders, had identified 3 human-inhabited systems as priority resource targets. Earth first, then the colony at Proxima, then the station network at Tau Ceti. The operation was designated under a commercial extraction classification, which in Conclave law was slightly different from invasion, in the same way that a house fire was slightly different from arson. The advance element was supposed to have been the Kethavari survey team. It hadn't worked out. The consortium had moved to a backup plan, a contracted human operative, someone already embedded in Earth's government infrastructure, who would provide the technical access needed to neutralize the planet's early warning systems when the extraction fleet arrived. That operative was her former handler at the CIA, a man named Garrett Kleins, who was not defective in any way the consortium could identify, and who had, as near as she could determine, decided that being on the winning side of an alien extraction operation was better than being on the losing end of one. She'd been trying to find a way to stop him for 8 months. She hadn't found one yet. You are one person, Sarath said when she finished. Yes. And we are 11 who cannot be sold and have no resources. Also yes. You are describing a problem that requires, at minimum, access to Conclave legal infrastructure, counterintelligence capability, a method of discrediting or neutralizing your former handler, and some mechanism for alerting your world's governments without triggering the panic response that allows extraction fleets to operate under emergency humanitarian mandate. That's a very accurate summary, she said. I was a systems analyst, Sareth said, before. One of the others, a female whose name Mara hadn't yet learned, made a short sound that Mara's implant translated as something between a laugh and an agreement. He means he made lists, she said. He made very good lists. The consortium found this annoying. What's your name? Mara asked her. Veth, she said. I was communications, the others, she gestured along the line. Kalar was engineering, Prim and Sarath were navigation. The rest were environmental survey, defense assessment, cultural analysis. We were a complete advanced team. She paused. A complete advanced team with no mission. Mara looked at them. 11 beings who had refused to participate in an operation against humanity, been classified as broken for it, and been sold at a clearance auction to the first bidder willing to take them. Standing in the cargo hold of a 40-meter hauler that needed a new atmospheric processor, looking back at her with 4 eyes each. You still have a mission, she said. It's just different from the one you were given. 93 days was not enough time. It was also what they had, so it had to be. The first 10 days were planning. Sareth made his lists. They were, as Veth had promised, excellent lists, not just inventories of what needed to be done but precise maps of dependency and sequence, the way you'd plan a reconstruction project, each task load-bearing, each delay cascading. Mara had worked with CIA analysts for 6 years, and she had never seen anyone think in systems the way Sareth thought in systems. She told him so. It is how Kethavari minds work, he said, without any apparent pride in it. We see connections, networks, the way each piece moves when the adjacent pieces move. The consortium valued this very highly when we used it for extraction planning. They found it less valuable when we used it to identify the ethical implications of extraction. I can imagine. The irony, he said, is that the same analysis that led us to refuse the mission also tells me that this mission is achievable. The network has leverage points. Your former handler is one. The conclave legal charter is another. The consortium's financing structure is a third. He looked at his list. The challenge is that each leverage point requires a capability we do not currently have. What do we currently have? He considered this with the gravity of someone who believed in accurate accounting. We have a ship that moves. We have your intelligence background and my systems analysis. We have Veth's communications expertise, which includes 3 conclave encryption protocols the consortium believes are proprietary. We have Kalar's engineering skills. We have 9 other people who are very determined. He paused. And we have the fact that the consortium believes all of us to be neutralized. That last one's worth a lot, Mara said. Yes, he said, they are not watching for us. Days 11 through 30 were the hard part. Not the hardest part, that was coming, but the part that felt most like slogging through waist-deep water in the dark. They needed access to the conclave's legal infrastructure to file a formal challenge against the consortium's extraction license. The challenge required documentation, and documentation required sources, and sources required someone willing to go on record against an entity with a 600-year operating history, and a legal defense budget larger than some planetary GDPs. Mara knew 2 such people. One was a Veltharan commercial whistleblower named Aris who was living in protective obscurity on a station near the Outer Rim. The other was a human journalist named Danilo Torres, who had been reporting on conclave commercial law for 15 years and had, 2 years ago, published a piece that had cost him his embed credentials and earned him a specific kind of institutional ill will that Mara recognized as the kind you only earned by being right. They went to Aris first. The station was called Threshold 7, and it was everything Yashari 9 wasn't. Small, slightly chaotic, smelling of recycled air, and something that might have been a cooking process. Aris met them in a machine parts stall that sold things Mara couldn't identify and asked no questions, which was probably the whole point of the location. It was the kind of meeting that happened in the backs of shops because Shops had ambient noise. Ambient noise confused directional audio pickup, and directional audio pickup was how you ended up documented. Eris was older than Mara had expected, long-limbed, gray-tinged, with the cautious eyes of a being who had been watching for threats for a very long time. It looked at the Kethavari with Mara and its expression shifted. "You were the advance team," it said. "Yes," Sarath said. "The consortium announced you were destroyed in a navigational accident." "The consortium," Sarath said carefully, "announced several things that were not accurate." Eris was quiet for a moment. Then it reached under the counter and produced a data chip. "I have been holding this for 2 years," it said, "waiting for a moment when there was someone worth giving it to." It looked at Mara. "The consortium's internal financial classification for your planet, the resource assessment, the timeline, everything the legal challenge needs in source-authenticated format." It paused. "I did not know who to give it to before. A human alone would not have known how to use it. Kethavari alone would have been dismissed as operationally biased." It looked between them. "But a human and an advanced team that refused the mission, that is a different story." Mara took the chip. It was lighter than it should have been for something that contained the mechanism of salvation. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Eris looked at her with the expression of someone who'd been asked a question they'd been answering to themselves for a long time, privately, in the small hours. "Because I have a daughter," it said, "and she lives on a world that looks, in the resource ledgers, a great deal like yours." Danilo Torres was harder to find and easier to convince. He was on a transit hub, between credentials and prospects, with the particular alertness of a person who had been right about something large and consequential, and was waiting for the consequences to catch up. He listened to everything Mara told him. Then he listened to Sarath. Then he looked at the data chip from Eris and spent 6 minutes reading things that made his face do complicated things. "I need to ask you something," he said to Sarath. "Ask." "The advance team. When you were on Earth, the woman in the field, what did she give you?" Sarath was quiet for a moment. "Bread," he said, "and something made from fruit fermented. She had a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She offered us the corner of it." He paused. "She did not know what we were. She did not ask. She simply offered." Torres was quiet. Then he said to Mara, "The story I write has to be airtight, source verified, legally insulated. If there are any gaps, the consortium's legal team will find them and I'll never work again, which is a secondary concern, and you'll never get the license challenge filed in time, which is the primary one." "There are no gaps," Mara said. "I'll need 3 days." "You have 3 days." The story ran on day 41. It ran on 17 conclave media networks, 4 human news services, and 1 outlet that Mara had never heard of, but that apparently had significant reach in the outer systems. Torres had written it in a way that was technically dry: legal filings, financial records, charter violations, but had embedded in it, carefully, the detail about the old woman in the field and her blanket, which turned out to be the sentence that most people quoted when they passed it along. The consortium's response was swift and professional. Denial, discrediting, a formal counter-narrative about Kethavari noncompliance and operational liability. Mara had expected it. What she hadn't entirely expected was the counter-response to the counter-response. Other conclave species, other commercial entities, a handful of conclave council members whose support for the Charter's non-interference provisions turned out to be genuine rather than procedural, all weighing in with the kind of measured, specific criticism that suggested they'd been waiting for an opportunity. "The network," Sarath said, watching the feeds in the cockpit. "Once you show them the connection, they see it. That is how it works." "You sound surprised," Mara said. "I am gratified," he said. "Surprise implies I did not account for it. I accounted for it. I simply did not know if it would be enough." It was not yet enough, but it was movement. Garrett Klein's was harder. He was not a stupid man. He was not even a venal one exactly. Mara had worked with him for 3 years, and she understood him well enough to know that his version of the calculation was coherent, if not justifiable. He had looked at the consortium's operation, assessed the probability of human resistance being effective, and concluded that humanity's best chance of long-term survival was negotiated compliance rather than feudal opposition. He was wrong about this, but he was wrong about it in a way that had its own internal logic, and that made him more dangerous than someone who was simply bought. She knew where he was because she'd been tracking him for 8 months. She'd told no one, filed no reports, trusted no agency protocols. She had learned a very long time ago that the most dangerous thing in any intelligence operation was the asset you thought you could rely on. She went to him alone. Veth had argued against this. Sareth had calculated the probability of success at 61%, which he had offered without editorial comment. Kaller had said something in Kethavari that Mara's implant translated as approximately, "The stubborn ones always go alone." She'd gone alone. The hotel on Yashari 9 where Klein's was staying was expensive and anonymous, which were the only 2 criteria for a safe house when you were operating under the assumption that nobody knew where you were. He opened the door when she knocked, because she had sent him a message using the recognition code they'd established in the 3rd year of her employment, and because, whatever else he was professional enough to respond to a coded contact from a former subordinate rather than ignore it. He looked at her for a long moment without speaking. He was older than she remembered, and not in the ways people usually aged. The lines were different, not fatigue lines but decision lines, the kind you got from carrying something heavy for too long. "You know," he said finally. "I know," she said. He stepped back from the door. She came in. They sat, she on the chair, he on the edge of the bed, in the same posture she associated with very old conversations in very small rooms, the kind where everything said from this point forward had weight. "You're going to try to stop it," he said. "I've already started." He looked at her steadily. "Mara, the consortium has 47 ships in the extraction fleet. Earth has no capability to resist that kind of force and no time to develop one. The only rational," she said, "is the word you use when you want to make surrender sound like wisdom. 47 ships. I know about the ships." "Then you know." "I know that you looked at the math and decided the math was the whole story." She leaned forward. "Garrett, you spent 3 years training me. You know what I know about how I work. When have I ever done the thing that the math said I should do?" He was quiet. "The Kethavari advance team refused their mission," she said. 11 beings, no resources, classified as defective. You know what defective means in this context. It means the same thing it meant when they tried it on me. It means they couldn't be made to believe something they knew wasn't true. He was still quiet, but his face had shifted. "The legal challenge is already filed," she said. "Eris gave us the documentation. Tors ran the story. There are 3 Conclave Council members who are now on record against the extraction license. The window the consortium is counting on, where they can move before any formal opposition solidifies, is closing. It hasn't closed yet, but if you withdraw your cooperation, if you cut the access they're counting on from the Earth side, the window closes before the fleet can move into position." She watched him think. She had always been able to watch Klein's think. It was one of the things that had made him a good handler, the fact that his processing wasn't hidden, just contained. "And if I don't," he said. "Then I find another way," she said. "And you spend the rest of your life, however long that is, under whatever authority ends up governing your planet, having been the person who opened the door." A very long pause. "You bought 11 aliens at a clearance auction," he said finally, not with judgment, just with the tone of someone assembling a picture. They weren't things to buy, she said, but yes. He looked at the floor for a moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and put a data module on the table between them. The access codes, he said, all of them. The consortium's secondary contact chain, the infrastructure mapping I was providing. She picked it up. I'm not doing this because of the legal challenge, he said. I'm doing it because you walked in here alone. I know, she said. And she did. Garrett Clines had spent his career making assessments based on what people were willing to risk. The willingness told you the truth about the calculation. The last 30 days were a different kind of work. Veth cracked the consortium's secondary communication channel using an encryption protocol they hadn't known she had, which was what happened when you classified your advanced team as non-functional and didn't bother revoking their technical clearances. Through the channel, they fed the consortium's fleet coordinator a series of carefully constructed false position updates that delayed the fleet's movement into attack formation by 11 days, enough time for the Conclave Council challenge to reach formal hearing status, at which point the extraction license was legally suspended pending review. 47 ships stopped. They didn't leave. A suspension wasn't a denial, and the consortium's legal team was already drafting the counter-challenge. But stopped was stopped, and stopped was the margin they needed. Sarath spent those 11 days doing the thing he was best at, showing people the connections. He briefed 3 separate Conclave Council members via secure channel, using Eris's documentation and the data from Clines' module, building the picture not as an argument but as a map, this piece, this piece, this piece, and look at where they lead. Kethavari systems analysis applied to an ethical problem, which was, Mara thought, just systems analysis applied to the most important system. On day 78, the Conclave Formal Review Board issued a preliminary ruling. The consortium's extraction license was found to contain misrepresented resource classifications under Article 14 of the Commercial Charter, specifically the provision requiring accurate sapience assessment of target worlds. The preliminary ruling suspended all fleet movements pending full audit. Full audit, 18 months minimum. 18 months was not forever, but forever was not what they were trying to achieve. They were trying to achieve enough time for humanity to know what was coming and to have a say in what came next. 18 months was enough time for that. Mara was sitting in the cockpit when Sarath came forward and did the thing he'd done the first night, stood at the co-pilot's chair without sitting in it, looking at the stars. 18 months, he said. Yes. You understand the challenge will be relitigated. Yes. The consortium will restructure the license application, correct the classification error, refile under a different provision. I know. So this is not finished. No, she said, but it started, and started is different from not started. He was quiet for a moment. Then, the woman in the field with the bread. What about her? I have thought about her many times, in the period since the advanced survey. I have considered why that particular encounter produced the result it did, why it was sufficient to override the conditioning that came later. I believe I understand it now. He paused. She did not know what we were. She could not have. We were wearing environmental suits that obscured our form. We communicated through translation devices that gave us a generic synthesized voice. We were, from her perspective, entirely unknown, and she offered anyway. Mara said nothing. The stars moved past the viewport in the slow arc of the ship, finding its next heading. It was not charity, Sarath said. I want to be precise about this. It was not pity or calculation or strategic friendliness. It was the simple assumption that unknown things sharing a cold field with you were worth a share of the bread. He looked at her. I have analyzed a great many species in my work. Most of them, when confronted with the genuinely unknown, default to caution, threat assessment, distance. Your species defaults to offering the corner of a blanket. Not all of us, Mara said. No, not all of you, but enough of you, enough that it reads in aggregate as a trait. He was quiet. Then, that is, I think, what the consortium failed to model. They modeled your weapons capabilities, your communication range, your resource yield. They did not model what it means to be a species that assumes the unknown is worth feeding. Myra thought about that for a while. The stars were thick here, out past the meridian arm, thick in the way they only got when you were far enough from anything that counted the light. Sarath, she said. Yes. The 11 of you, where do you want to go? He considered this. I do not know yet, he said. We have been for a long time a team with no mission. We have now had a mission. I think, he paused, choosing the words carefully. I think we would like to understand what it is to have a choice about what the next mission is. She nodded, that's fair. What about you? Me. You have spent 8 months in pursuit of this. What do you do with the time after? She looked at the stars. The gas station coffee was long gone. She'd have to find more somewhere. The universe was large and coffee shops were, as far as she knew, a human invention, but she'd been surprised before. I think, she said slowly, that 18 months is long enough for humanity to get its diplomatic act together, but only just, and probably only if someone who knows what the conclave looks like from the inside is available to help them navigate it. That sounds like a mission, Sarath said. It sounds like one, yes. Would you want company? She looked at him. He was looking at the stars, not at her, with the focused attention of someone already doing the calculation. The same focused look he'd had in the auction hall, fixed on a point past the far wall, not on nothing, she understood now. On something he was already planning for, that no one else in that room could see yet. That depends, she said. Can you make the list? I can always make the list, he said. She smiled at the stars. Outside, the ship moved through the dark. Behind her in the corridor, she could hear the others, Veth's voice low and rhythmic as she ran a communications diagnostic, Caller's tools ringing against something in the engine room, the quiet shuffling of beings settling into the unfamiliar weight of their own freedom. 11 aliens who had refused to do the thing they'd been sold to do. One human who had been classified as broken for the same reason. Moving through the space between stars, in the direction of something none of them had a word for yet, that felt, when she pressed her hand flat against the cold viewport glass and watched the light come from distances her mind couldn't really hold. That felt, precisely and stubbornly, and against all reasonable calculation, like home. The audit lasted 22 months, not 18. The consortium refiled 7 times. Each refiling was met by a counter-documentation package that grew, filing by filing, as more species came forward with records of commercial charter violations that shared the consortium's particular interpretation of what counted as a person. Aris testified twice. Tors published 4 follow-up pieces. The Kethavari gave formal depositions that were, in conclave legal history, the first time an advanced survey team had testified against its own commissioning entity. Humanity got 22 months to learn that it was not alone, and that not being alone came with complications. There were panic responses, there were political crises. There was a period of approximately 3 months where every government on Earth was simultaneously trying to contact the conclave and pretending to their respective populations that they had it under control, which they did not. But Mara had expected this, and had already drafted the briefing materials, and Sarath had already mapped the decision trees, and Veth had already established the secure communication protocols. So when the call finally came, when the UN Secretary General's office got the right credentials to reach the right conclave frequency, there was someone on the other end who spoke both languages fluently enough to say, "Slow down, it's okay. Here's what you need to know, here's who you can trust, here's where to start." The consortium's final license application was denied on a Tuesday. Mara was in a conference room in Geneva when the notification came through. sitting across from a group of diplomats who had been up for 30 hours and were running on cold coffee and controlled terror. She read the notification. Then she slid her thermos across the table to the diplomat nearest her, a woman named Dr. Amara Nkosi, who had been coordinating the human side of the legal response for 8 months, and who was the best systems thinker Mara had encountered on Earth, which was saying something, because she'd been comparing against a very high benchmark. "It's done," Nkosi said. "For now," Mara said. Nkosi looked at her. "For now. You're not exactly a celebrations person, are you?" "I'm celebrating," Mara said. "I just do it quietly." Nkosi looked down at the thermos. "This is gas station coffee. It's the best kind." Nkosi took a drink, made a face, took another drink. "Okay," she said, "I see it." Outside the conference room windows, Geneva was gray and ordinary and entirely itself. People moved on streets below with the focused purpose of beings going places they had decided to go. A woman crossed the square below with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders against the October cold, and for a moment, just a moment, the light hit her in a way that made her look timeless, like something from a photograph taken before anyone knew what was coming. Mara pressed her hand against the cold glass. Somewhere on the ship, which was docked at a private bay outside the city, Sarath was making a new list. She was looking forward to reading it. The first human diplomat to formally address the conclave was a retired professor of comparative linguistics named Dr. Emeka Okonkwo, which was not the choice anyone had expected and was entirely the right one. He had been recommended by Mara, who had told Nkosi that what humanity needed in that room was not a politician who would perform confidence and not a general who would project force, but someone who genuinely found other minds interesting, whose curiosity was real, visible, and not in any way strategic, because the conclave's oldest member species had been reading performance for 600 years and had very limited patience for it. Okonkwo had spent 4 decades studying how languages shaped the ontologies of the species that spoke them. He had published 2 books on the subject that Mara had never read, but that Sarath had read in the 3 weeks between their first contact and the formal hearing, and had described as careful and accurate in all the areas where accuracy is rare. The formal hearing lasted 6 days. Okonkwo spoke for 11 hours total. He said, "I don't know" twice, which was, according to Sarath's analysis of conclave precedent, more credibility building than anything else he could have said, because species that claimed to know everything were species the conclave had learned to distrust on principle. Humanity was placed on the protected sentient species register on day 4 of the hearing, which was technically a procedural measure and not a full charter membership, but which had the practical effect of making the consortium's extraction license not just suspended, but permanently unrenewable for any target in the Sol system and its established territories. Mara was not in the room when it happened. She was in the corridor outside, sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, drinking coffee she'd found at a vendor stall that had been selling it to human diplomatic staff and had gotten the temperature exactly wrong. It was too hot. She drank it anyway. Veth came out first, because Veth moved faster than anyone else on the team and had apparently decided that Mara should hear it from someone she trusted. She crouched down in front of Mara with the focused expression she wore when she was transmitting information she considered high priority. "Protected register," Veth said. Mara closed her eyes for a moment. "You are not celebrating," Veth said. "I am," Mara said. "I do it quietly." Sarath said you would say that. Veth sat down on the floor beside her, which was not a thing a Kethavari typically did, and which felt, therefore, like a specific gesture. "He also said to tell you that he has finished the new list." "Already?" "He started it 3 weeks ago," Veth said. "He was waiting for this to be resolved before presenting it." "What's on it?" Veth tilted her head, the Kethavari gesture that her implant had learned to translate as something between a smile and a shrug. He calls it the secondary phase, she said. You will want to read it. It is a very good list. The door to the hearing chamber opened, and Okonkwo came out, surrounded by the rest of the diplomatic staff, all of them doing the controlled expression thing that people did when something significant had just happened, and they were still deciding how they felt about it. He was taller than Mara had expected, unhurried in the way people got when they had been doing difficult things for a long time, and no longer needed external validation of the effort. He saw Mara on the floor and stopped. You're the one, he said. I'm one of them, she said. He looked at Veth. And you are Kethavari. Yes, Veth said, we are the defective ones. He made a sound that Mara identified as a laugh that had been interrupted partway through by something more complicated. My granddaughter, he said, is going to want to know everything about you. She is 12 years old and she has been convinced since she was 8 that there are other people in the universe. Her parents think it is a phase. He looked at Veth steadily. She is going to be very irritating about being right. Tell her, Veth said, that she was right for the correct reasons. That is more important than being right. He nodded. Yes, he said. I think I will. He moved on, and the corridor filled and emptied with the traffic of people processing a changed world. Mara stayed on the floor. The coffee cooled to drinkable and she drank it. Sarath's list had 47 items on it. He presented it in the cargo hold of the asterisk persistence of error asterisk, the same space where Mara had given her briefing 11 months earlier, with the same 11 beings arranged in approximately the same configuration, except that now they stood differently, not with the careful stillness of beings managing their own uncertainty, but with the ease of people who had somewhere to be. The list was organized in 4 columns: task, required capability, estimated timeline dependencies. It covered, in order, the 17 other per-contact worlds on the consortium's resource target list that were now inadequately protected under the current charter provisions, the 3 species currently held in consortium work programs under legally dubious classification schemes, the gap in conclave jurisprudence that had allowed the extraction license to be filed in the first place, and the specific legal reform required to close it. And 12 other items that Mara read through carefully twice before she looked up. This is an agenda, she said. Yes, he said. For an organization that doesn't exist yet. Most organizations begin that way. She looked at the list. 47 items, prioritized by urgency, cross-referenced by capability requirement, with realistic timeline estimates that she recognized as realistic because they accounted for failure probability rather than assuming success. This was the thing about Sarath's lists. They were honest about the difficulty. They didn't flinch from the scale of the work. They just laid it out and trusted that the people reading them were capable of looking at the full scope without needing it minimized first. Item 31, she said. Establishing a permanent human liaison office with conclave legal infrastructure, he said. Okonkwo's already started that. I know. I listed it as a dependency for items 32 through 35. Item 42. Training Exchange Program. Kethavari Systems Analysis paired with Human Field Operations. We are better at seeing the network. You are better at moving through it alone when the network doesn't work. She looked at him. He was looking at the list with the calm attention he brought to everything he found worth doing. Sarath, she said. Yes. You understand that this list is about 10 years of work. 12, he said. I was optimistic on several items, perhaps 15. You're okay with that? I am Kethavari, he said. We think in networks, not in moments. A 15-year project is simply a moment viewed from the appropriate distance. He paused. Are you okay with that? She thought about it. The cargo hold was quiet, the ship idling at the Geneva dock with the patient hum of a vessel that was used to waiting. Through the hull, She could feel the faint vibration of the city, trams, traffic, the whole ordinary machinery of a world that had been given more time to be itself. "I'm going to need better coffee," she said. Kaller said something from the back. Mara's implant translated. "I have been studying your coffee. I believe I can modify the atmospheric processor to produce it." She looked at him. "You've been studying my coffee." "The composition is not complex," he said, with the dignity of an engineer who found all problems equally worthy of attention. "The difficulty is the water temperature and the pressure variables." "I have a theory," Veth said quietly. "He has been working on it for 3 weeks." Myra looked at Kaller for a long moment. Then she looked at Sarath, and Veth, and the other 8 of them. The cultural analyst who had spent the last month reading every piece of human literature Mara could load onto the ship's library. The navigation pair who had started teaching Mara the Kethavari star naming system, which was based on relationships rather than positions. The defense assessor who had taken it upon themselves to learn to play chess and beaten Mara 4 times out of 5, and seemed genuinely delighted by this. 11 beings who had chosen conscience over mission and been sold for it, who had spent months in a cargo bay repurposing their skills toward a different kind of mission, one nobody had assigned them, one they had built themselves, piece by piece, in the space that opened up when the old framework fell away. She picked up the list. "Start with items 1 through 3, she said. "The precontact worlds. They're the most urgent and the dependencies are the fewest." She looked at Sarath. "What do we need?" "Eris has a contact at the Conclave Charter Office who has been waiting for exactly this kind of initiative," he said. "Tors wants to embed with us for the first case, if we'll allow it. Okonkwo's office can provide diplomatic cover for the access we'll need." "And the ship?" "The ship moves," he said. That was always sufficient. She rolled up the list and tapped it once against her palm, the way she'd tapped her thermos, the way she'd done the same small gesture with different objects her whole adult life, when she was about to do a thing she decided to do and didn't need to decide again. "Then let's move," she said. The asterisk persistence of error lifted from the Geneva dock at 400 local time in the dark before the early light, and nobody on the ground watched it go because it was a 40-meter hauler and 40-meter haulers were not. Yet, the kind of thing that turned heads. This would change, but not today. Today it was just a ship, carrying 12 people who had all been told, at some point, that they were broken in ways that couldn't be fixed, moving through the dark toward a list of things that needed doing, in the direction that the work required. Kaller brought Mara coffee at 500. It was not right. The temperature was a degree low and the pressure had been slightly overcalculated, producing a cup that was dense in a way that was close to correct but not quite there. She drank it anyway. "Next time," Kaller said. "Next time," she said. He went back to the engine room. Through the forward viewport, the stars were the same stars they'd always been, the same distances, the same light, the same cold, burning patience. The same sky that a woman in a field somewhere had been standing under when 3 unknown things had come over a rise and she had looked at them, and looked at her bread, and made the only calculation that made any sense. Mara put her hand against the glass. The ship moved. The first precontact world on the list was called, in the Kethavari naming system, Warmth Near the Quiet Star. In the Conclave Resource Registry, it was designation PX 7714. It had no name in human language because humans had not yet had occasion to name it, but it was the size of Mars, orbited a sun in the habitable range, and was home to approximately 900 million beings who had, in the 18 months since the consortium's extraction license freeze, continued their lives in complete ignorance of how close those lives had come to an administrative reclassification. The consortium had filed a new resource application for PX 7714 6 months after the Sol system ruling. The application used a different legal provision, cited a different sapience threshold assessment, and was, in Sarath's analysis, structurally identical to the original Earth application translated into a different legal language. They had 4 weeks before the application cleared its preliminary review and entered the active queue. Mara had spent those 4 weeks doing what she was good at, building the picture before anyone knew she was building it. She had contacted Aris's charter contact, a Veltheran legal clerk named Tev who spoke 7 languages and had spent 20 years watching consortium applications move through the review pipeline with the mounting frustration of a being who understood exactly what was happening and had no mechanism to stop it. Tev was, in Sarath's assessment, the most important node in the network they were building, not because of what Tev could do alone, but because of what Tev knew about where the system's pressure points were. The assessment threshold provision, Tev told them, in a secure channel conversation that Veth had routed through 3 separate relay stations. The consortium's new application uses the lower threshold, the one that was written in the early expansion period, before contact with species above Category 7 cognition. The provision was never updated because no one ever challenged it. It has been used 19 times in the last 200 years, always for worlds that were genuinely below threshold. Until now, Mara said. Until now, Tev said. If you can provide evidence that the beings on PX 7714 meet the standard for Category 7 cognition, the application fails on its own terms. No need for a political fight, just a fact. Who assesses the category? A conclave-chartered xenocognition specialist. There are 7 approved assessors. The consortium will have already arranged for its preferred assessor to receive the application. And the other 6 are not arranged for anything, Tev said, yet. Sarath had the list of the 6 unallocated assessors compiled within an hour. Veth had communication protocols for 3 of them within the day. Within the week, a Kethavari xenocognition assessor named Dr. Preva, who had, it emerged, been quietly compiling documentation on consortium application irregularities for 11 years, while waiting for exactly this kind of moment, had submitted a parallel assessment request that created, under conclave procedure, an automatic review hold pending reconciliation of competing assessments. The hold bought 60 days. In those 60 days, Tors published, Okonkwo's office filed a supporting brief. 3 members of the Conclave's Emerging Species Advocacy Committee, a body that had technically existed for 40 years, but had never been properly funded or staffed, because no one had ever needed it to work before, convened for the first time in its actual mandate, and issued a formal recommendation that the assessment threshold provision be suspended pending revision. On day 58, the consortium withdrew the PX 7714 application. Not because they were defeated, because the cost-benefit calculation had shifted. 47 ships were expensive to position. Legal challenges were expensive to fight. The administrative delay alone cost more than the projected yield from a single mid-sized target world. The consortium was a commercial entity, and commercial entities moved toward profit. They would recalculate and file elsewhere, under different provisions, with different targets. But each time they did, the network that Sarath was building would be one iteration more prepared. It's not a victory, Mara said that evening in the cockpit. No, Sarath said, it's item 1 off the list. 46 to go. 46 to go. She looked at the stars. Warmth near the quiet star was not visible from this position. They were too far out, the angle wrong. But she knew which direction it was, in the way you knew where home was when you'd been away long enough, by the pull of a thing you hadn't touched but had defended. 900 million beings who didn't know her name. Who would never know this had happened. Who were, right now, doing whatever it was they did on evenings when the work was done, eating, talking, watching the light change on whatever kind of sky they had, passing something warm and good between them in the gathering dark. She thought about the woman in the field. She thought about bread and a blanket's corner and the specific human, the specific, particular, inarguable human, stubbornness of assuming that unknown things were worth feeding. She unscrewed the cap of the thermos. "Sarath," she said. "Yes." "What's item 2? He smiled, or made the reorganization of features that she had learned over 11 months, to read as what a smile looked like on a face that wasn't built for them. "Item 2, he said, "is considerably more complicated than item 1. "Good," she said. She drank. The ship moved on through the dark, patient and persistent, and fully committed to the direction it had chosen, carrying 12 broken things toward the next piece of a list that had no end in sight and required all of them, and was, therefore, precisely the right kind of work. There were things Mara had not expected. She had not expected Caller to eventually perfect the coffee, but he did, on a Tuesday morning 3 months into the second operation, producing a cup that was, by any measure she could apply, better than anything she'd had from a gas station in Flagstaff. She had not expected to feel, when she drank it, a specific grief that had nothing to do with the coffee and everything to do with the distance between here and there, and to find afterward that the grief was clean, the kind that didn't ask to be resolved, just acknowledged. She had not expected Veth to start learning guitar. There was a battered acoustic on the ship that had come with it when she bought it from the salvage dealer, and one day, without announcement, Veth had picked it up and begun the slow, patient work of figuring out where the sounds came from. She was not good at it. She practiced every evening for an hour in the cargo hold, the chords halting and imprecise, and she did not seem bothered by the imprecision. When Mara asked her why she had chosen the guitar, Veth said, "The cultural analyst found recordings of your music. She played me one. I wanted to understand how the sounds were made." "Which recording?" Mara asked. Veth played 4 bars of something Mara recognized from very far away, her mother's kitchen, a Sunday, the smell of food and the particular light of early afternoon. She didn't ask how Veth had found it. She just listened. She had not expected the cultural analyst, whose name was Rith, and who had been the quietest of the 11 for the first 4 months, to become the most effective member of the team at first contact briefings, because Rith had the ability to sit with a new species and simply be curious about them in a way that communicated itself across every language barrier, the way genuine interest always did. She had watched Rith sit across from a conclave council member from a species Mara didn't have a name for yet, and watched them with the complete, attentive delight of a being who found other beings astonishing, and watched the council member's posture change degree by degree, from formal and guarded to something that was functionally open. She had not expected to feel, one morning, watching the 11 of them move through their routines on the ship, that the word she was looking for was not team and not crew, but something she didn't have in English, and that the Kethavari word for might have been roughly translated as people who share a direction. People who share a direction. People who had come from different points and were now moving toward the same horizon, not because they'd been assigned to each other, but because the situation had made them necessary to each other, and they had been honest enough to admit it and stubborn enough to build on it. She had not expected any of it. She had expected the work, which was hard and ongoing and showed no signs of ending. She had expected Sarath's lists, which were always accurate and always longer than you hoped. She had expected the coffee to be wrong and then, eventually, to be right. Everything else was the unplanned kind of thing that happened when you made a decision based on something other than the math, when you pressed your hand against the cold glass and let the pull of it tell you which direction to move in, and moved. On the 39th item on Sarath's list, there was a species on a world in the outer systems that the Conclave's resource registry had flagged 3 times in the last decade and protected 0 times, because they were a pre-technological civilization who did not yet have a word for the stars above them. The consortium had a pending application. The application was, technically, within the current provisions of the Charter. Closing it would require the Charter provision itself to be revised, which would require a conclave legislative process that had not been successfully initiated in 60 years. Item 39 was going to be hard. Mara was looking forward to it. She was, according to every assessment anyone had ever made of her, non-responsive to standard conditioning, persistently non-compliant and defective in ways that could not be corrected. She had a ship that moved, a list that needed doing, 11 beings who were the best people she had ever worked with, and coffee that had finally been gotten right. She picked up the thermos. She got to work.